That was the iPhone? That was like iTouch.
iTouch. There's no such thing as an iTouch.
You old, man.
It's the iTouch. There's no such thing as an iTouch.
Is it streaming right now?
It's definitely streaming. We're live.
Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Janavalabha Girivaradari Gopi Janavalabha Girivaradari Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yamunatiravanachari Yamunatiravanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Janavalabha Girivaradari Gopi Janavalabha Girivaradari Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yamunatiravanachari Yamunatiravanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parirajakarya Ashtatar Shri Srimad Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parirajakarya Ashtatar Shri Srimad Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai Anantakoti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Vrimsako Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopi Go Shamakund Radha Kund Giri Govardhan Ki Jai Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai Mayapur Navadvip Dham Ki Jai Mathura Dham Ki Jai Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Tulasi Devi Ki Jai Yamuna Mai Ki Jai Ganga Mai Ki Jai Samaveta Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
I'm in a room full of haters.
Okay, so we're reading from Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, Adi Leela, chapter 5, text 41. Jaya Jaya Sri Chaitanya, Jaya Nityananda,
Jai Jai Shri Chaitanya, Jai Nityananda,
Jaya Advaita Chandra, Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda,
Jai Advaita Chandra, Jai Gaura Bhakta Vrinda,
Jaya Jaya Sri Chaitanya, Jaya Nityananda,
Jai Jai Shri Chaitanya, Jai Nityananda,
Jaya Advaita Chandra, Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda,
Jai Advaita Chandra, Jai Gaura Bhakta Vrinda,
Jaya Jaya Sri Chaitanya, Jaya Nityananda,
Jai Jai Shri Chaitanya, Jai Nityananda,
Jaya Advaita Chandra, Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda.
Jai Advaita Chandra, Jai Gaura Bhakta Vrinda.
Okay. Vasudeva,
Vasudeva,
Sankarshana,
Sankarshana,
Pradyumna,
Pradyumna,
Aniruddha,
Aniruddha,
Dvitiya,
Dvitiya,
Chatuvyuha,
Chatuvyuha,
Turiya,
Turiya,
Vishuddha,
Vishuddha,
Vasudeva, Sankarshana, Pradyumna, Aniruddha,
Vasudeva, Sankarshana, Pradyumna, Aniruddha,
Dvitiya, Chaturvyuha, Turiya, Vishuddha,
Dvitiya, Chatuvyuha, Turiya, Vishuddha,
Vasudeva, Sankarshana, Pradyumna, Aniruddha,
Vasudeva, Sankarshana, Pradyumna, Aniruddha,
Dvitiya, Chaturvyuha, Turiya, Vishuddha,
Dvitiya, Chatuvyuha, Turiya, Vishuddha,
Vasudeva, Sankarshana, Pradyumna, Aniruddha,
Vasudeva, Sankarshana, Pradyumna, Aniruddha,
Dvitiya, Chaturvyuha, Turiya, Vishuddha.
Dvitiya, Chatuvyuha, Turiya, Vishuddha. Vasudev Sankarshan Pradyumna Niruddha Vasudev Sankarshan
Pradyumna, Aniruddha,
Dvitiya Chaturvyuha Turiya Vishuddha
Dvitiya Chaturvyuha
Turiya, Vishuddha.
Vasudeva Sankarshan Pradyumna Aniruddha
Vasudeva Sankarshan Pradyumna Niruddha
Dvitiya Chaturvyuha Turiya Vishuddha
Dvitiya Chaturvyuha Turiya Vishuddha
Vasudeva Sankarsana Pradyumna Niruddha
Vasudeva Sankarshan
Pradyumna Niruddha
Dvitiya Chaturvyuha Turiya Vishuddha
Dvitiya Chaturvyuha Turiya Vishuddha.
I'll say the prayers now because I'll mention a few things before I read it. Om Gyana Timrandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Shashruan Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Mano Vishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kada Mayam Dadati Swayantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yataf Padakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavam Scha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatham Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Vrijana Seitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitam Scha Hey Krishna Kruna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Priye Panchakalpa Tubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Vyevacha Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Dhanavira Swamini Namane Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swamini Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharine Nirvishesha Srinivadi Paschatadhistarine. Okay. Here we go. So today is the auspicious appearance day of Sri Ramanujacarya.
Jai.
So I found a few quotes that Srila Prabhupada says about Ramanujacharya. Actually, I'll read one of them right now, just before we start. So this is in a letter Srila Prabhupada wrote to one of his disciples. let's see. To Aitreya Rishi Das on the 26th of January, 1972. You speak of impersonalism. We welcome all impersonalists to come because if they are real impersonalists, they will see that our society is perfect and complete. Ramanujacarya is considered to be very stalwart Acharya, simply because he completely defeated the impersonalism of Shankaracharya. And even to this day in India, especially in the south, the followers of Ramanujacarya and Shankaracharya engage in talks, and always the Shankarites are defeated. But most of the so-called impersonalists of today are rogues. So we see that. That's pretty obvious. So Srila Ramanujacharya very staunchly defeated the impersonalism of Shankaracharya, and I thought it would be pretty awesome to read, some of what Ramanujacharya had, written in that regard, because he wrote a commentary on the Vedanta Sutra called the Sri Bhasya. And so I thought it'd be amazing to hear from him. So I was looking, trying to find where his commentary is somewhere online. I found somewhere that has a direct translation of it, but it looks like it's translated by someone who's not a devotee. His name was like George something. So I only took one little snippet from there to read, but I found in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, there's a purport where Srila Prabhupada puts a huge section, just a straight quote from Srila Ramanujacharya in his Sri Bhasya. It's like several paragraphs. So you can read some of that. It's a very long purport because it's a very complex subject matter, it seems. When we hear from Ramanujacharya, you can see in his Sri Bhasya, it's like defeating Shankaracharya's impersonalism from all different angles. And that's a sign of intelligence. One can defeat an argument from many angles. So we'll read some of this very elaborate translation and purport here. Let's see. Did we do the word for word synonyms yet? No. I don't think so. Okay. Vasudeva.
Vasudeva.
The expansion named Vasudeva.
Expansion named Vasudeva.
Sankarshana.
Sankarshana.
The expansion named Sankarshan.
Expansion named Sankarshan.
Pradyumna.
Pradyumna.
The expansion named Pradyumna.
Expansion named Pradyumna.
Aniruddha.
Aniruddha.
The expansion named Aniruddha.
Expansion named Aniruddha.
Dvitiya.
Dvitiya.
Chatuvyuha.
Chatuvyuha.
The second quadruple expansion.
The second quadruple expansion.
This. Turiya.
Turiya.
Transcendental.
Transcendental.
Vishuddha.
Vishuddha.
Free from all material contamination.
Free from all material contamination.
Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada.
Jai Prabhupada.
Vasudev, Sankarshan, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha constitute this second quadruple. They are purely transcendental. Purport. Sripad Shankaracharya has misleadingly explained the quadruple form, Chaturvyuha, in his interpretation of the 42nd aphorism of the second kanda of chapter 2 of the Vedanta Sutras, Utpatya Sambhavat. In verses 41 through 47 of Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami answers Sripad Shankaracharya's misleading objections to the personal feature of the absolute truth. Okay, get ready. I think we're going to have to focus really steadily. I think it's intricate points here. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, the absolute truth, is not like a material object that can be known by experimental knowledge or sense perception. In the Narada Pancharatra, this fact has been explained by Narayan himself to Lord Shiva. But Shankaracharya, the incarnation of Shiva, under the order of Narayan, his master, had to mislead the monists who favor ultimate extinction. In the conditioned stage of existence, all living entities have 4 basic defects, of which one is the cheating propensity. Shankaracharya has carried this cheating propensity to the extreme to mislead the monists. Actually, the quadruple forms explained in the Vedic literature cannot be understood by the speculation of a conditioned soul. The quadruple forms should therefore be accepted just as they are described. The authority of the Vedas is such that even if one does not understand something by his limited perception, he should accept the Vedic injunction and not create interpretations to suit his imperfect understanding. In his Shariraka Bhasya, however, Shankaracharya has increased the misunderstanding of the monists. The quadruple forms have a spiritual existence that can be realized in Vasudev Sattva, Shuddha Sattva, or unqualified goodness, which accompanies complete absorption in the understanding of Vasudev. The quadruple forms, who are full of the six opulences of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, are the enjoyers of the internal potency. Thinking the absolute personality of Godhead to be poverty-stricken or to have no potency, or in other words, to be impotent, is simply rascaldom. This rascaldom is the profession of the conditioned soul, and it increases his bewilderment. One who cannot understand the distinctions between the spiritual world and material world has no qualification to examine or know the situation of the transcendental quadruple forms. In his commentaries on the second kanda of the Vedanta Sutra, chapter 2, verses 42 to 45, His Holiness Sripad Shankaracharya has made a futile attempt to nullify the existence of these quadruple forms in the spiritual world. Shankaracharya says, verse 42, that devotees think the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vasudev, Sri Krishna, to be one, to be free from material qualities, and to have a transcendental body full of bliss and eternal existence. He is the ultimate goal of the devotees who believe that the Supreme Personality of Godhead expands himself in the four other eternal transcendental forms, Vasudev, Sankarshan, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha. From Vasudev, who is the primary expansion, come Sankarshan, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha in that order. Another name of Vasudev is Paramatma. Another name of Sankarshan is Jiva, the living entity. Another name of Pradyumna is mind, and another name of Aniruddha is Ahankar, false ego. Among these expansions, Vasudeva is considered the origin of material nature. Therefore, Shankaracharya says that Sankarshan, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha must be creations of that original cause. Great souls assert that Narayan, who is known as Paramatma, the Supersoul, is beyond material nature, and this is in accordance with the statements of the Vedic literature. Mayavadis also agree that Narayan can expand himself in various forms. Shankara says that he does not attempt to argue that portion of the devotee's understanding, but he must protest the idea that Sankarshan is produced from Vasudeva, Pradyumna is produced from Sankarshan, and Aniruddha is produced from Pradyumna. For if Sankarshan is understood to represent the living entities created from the body of Vasudeva, the living entities would have to be non-eternal. The living entities are supposed to be freed from material contamination by engaging in prolonged temple worship of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, reading Vedic literature, and performing yoga and pious activities to attain the Supreme Lord. But if the living entities have been created from material nature at a certain point, they would be non-eternal and would have no chance to be liberated and associate with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. When a cause is nullified, its results are nullified. In the second chapter of Vedanta Sutra, Acharya Vedavyas has also refuted the conception that the living beings were ever born. Natma Shrutir Nityatvak Cha Tabhyah. Because there is no creation for the living entities, they must be eternal. Shankaracharya says, verse 43, that devotees think Pradyumna, who is considered to represent the senses, has sprung from Sankarshan, who is considered to represent the living entities. But we cannot actually experience that a person can produce senses. Devotees also say that from Pradyumna has sprung Aniruddha, who is considered to represent the ego. But Shankaracharya says that unless the devotees can show how ego and the means of knowledge can generate from a person, such an explanation of the Vedanta Sutra cannot be accepted, for no other philosophers accept the sutras in that way. Shankaracharya also says, verse 44, that he cannot accept the devotee's idea that Sankarshan, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha are equally as powerful as the absolute personality of Godhead, full in six opulences of knowledge, wealth, strength, fame, beauty, and renunciation, and free from the flaw of generation at a certain point. Even if they are full expansions, the flaw of generation remains. Vasudeva, Sankarshan, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha, being distinct individual persons, cannot be one. Therefore, if they are accepted as absolute, full and equal, there would have to be many personalities of Godhead. But there is no need to accept that there are many personalities of Godhead, because acceptance of one omnipotent God is sufficient for all purposes. The acceptance of more than one God is contradictory to the conclusion that Lord Vasudeva, the absolute personality of Godhead, is one without a second. Even if we agree to accept that the quadruple forms of Godhead are all identical, we cannot avoid the incongruous flaw of non-eternity. Unless we accept that there are some differences among the personalities, there is no meaning to the idea that Sankarshan is an expansion of Vasudeva, Pradyumna is an expansion of Sankarshan, and Aniruddha is an expansion of Pradyumna. There must be a distinction between cause and effect. For example, a pot is distinct from the earth which it is made, and therefore we can ascertain that the earth is the cause and the pot is the effect. Without such distinctions, there is no meaning to cause and effect. Furthermore, the followers of the Pancharatric principles do not accept any differences in knowledge and qualities between Vasudeva, Sankarshan, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha. The devotees accept all these expansions to be one, but why should they restrict oneness to these quadruple expansions? Certainly, we should not do so, for all living entities, from Brahma to the insignificant ant, are expansions of Vasudeva, as accepted in all the Shrutis and Smritis. Shankaracharya also says, verse 45, that the devotees who follow the Pancharatra state that God's qualities and God himself, as the owner of the qualities, are the same. But how can the Bhagavat school state that the six opulences, wisdom, wealth, strength, fame, beauty, and renunciation, are identical with Lord Vasudeva? This is impossible. In his Lagu Bhagavatamrita, verses 80 to 83, Srila Rupa Goswami has refuted the charges directed against the devotees by Sripad Shankaracharya regarding their explanation of the quadruple forms of Vasudeva, Sankarshan, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha. He says that these four expansions of Narayan are present in the spiritual sky, where they are famous as Mahavasta. Among them, Vasudeva is worshipped within the heart by meditation, because he is the predominating deity of the heart, as explained in Srimad Bhagavatam 4.3.23. So I'm just interjecting. Now we're hearing Srila Rupa Goswami's refutation of those charges of Shankaracharya. It's a little confusing, and it's hard to understand some of the points that Shankaracharya is arguing, and then it might also be a little confusing to see where Srila Prabhupada is saying this is Shankaracharya's point versus where he's explaining the philosophy. But up until now, a lot of the points were Shankaracharya's refutation of how the Chaturvyuha is not as the devotees explain it. But now we're hearing Srila Rupa Goswami's argument against that. So, Sankarshan, the second expansion, is Vasudeva's personal expansion for pastimes. And since he is the reservoir of all living entities, he is sometimes called Jiva. The beauty of Sankarshan is more than that of innumerable full moons radiating light beams. He is worshipable as the principle of ego. He has invested Anantadev with all the potencies of sustenance. For the dissolution of the creation, he also exhibits himself as the supersoul in Rudra, irreligiosity, Ahi, the snake, Antaka, death, and the demons. So one thing that might have cleared up some confusion from earlier, now we're hearing how, earlier we heard how Sankarshan represents the jivas, and here's more of an explanation on that. Sankarshan is the reservoir of all living entities, and he is sometimes called jiva. So more detail on that. Pradyumna, the third manifestation, appears from Sankarshan. Those who are especially intelligent worship this Pradyumna expansion of Sankarshan as the principle of the intelligence. The goddess of fortune always chants the glories of Pradyumna in the place known as Ilavrita Varsha, and she always serves him with great devotion. His complexion appears sometimes golden and sometimes bluish, like a new monsoon cloud in the sky. He is the origin of the creation of the material world, and he has invested his creative principle in Cupid. It is by his direction only that all men and demigods and other living entities function with energy for regeneration. Aniruddha, the fourth of the quadruple expansions, is worshipped by great sages and psychologists as the principle of the mind. His complexion is similar to the bluish hue of a blue cloud. He engages in the maintenance of the cosmic manifestation and is the supersoul of Dharma, the deity of religiosity. Manu, the progenitor of mankind, and the Devatas, demigods. The Moksha Dharma Vedic scripture indicates that Pradyumna is the deity of the total mind, whereas Aniruddha is the deity of the total ego. But previous statements regarding the quadruple forms are confirmed in the Pancharatra Tantras in all respects. In the Laghu Bhagavatamrita, verses 44 to 66, there's a lucid explanation of the inconceivable potencies of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Negating Shankaracharya's statements, the Maha Varaha Purana declares, Sarve Nitya Shashvatascha Dehas Tasya Paramatmanaha Hano Padana Rahita Naiva Prakritija Kvachit. All the varied expansions of the personality of Godhead are transcendental and eternal, and all of them repeatedly descend to all the different universes of the material creation. Their bodies, composed of eternity, bliss, and knowledge, are everlasting. There is no chance of their decaying, for they are not creations of the material world. Their forms are concentrated spiritual existence, always complete with all spiritual qualities and devoid of material contamination. Confirming these statements, the Narada Pancharatra asserts, Maniryata vibhagena nila pita dibir yutaha rupa bedam avapnoti dhyana beda tatachata. The infallible personality of Godhead can manifest his body in different ways according to different modes of worship, just as the Vaidurya gem can manifest itself in various colors such as blue and yellow. Each incarnation is distinct from all the others. This is possible by the Lord's inconceivable potency, by which he can simultaneously represent himself as one, as various partial forms, and as the origin of these partial forms. Nothing is impossible for his inconceivable potencies. Krishna is one without a second, but he manifests himself in different bodies, so as stated by Narada in the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. Chitram Bataitadikena Vapusha Yugapat Pratak Griheshu Dvasta Sahasram Shriya Eka Udavahat. It is wonderful indeed that one Krishna has simultaneously become different Krishnas in 16,000 palaces to accept 16,000 queens as his wives. Bhagavatam 1069-2. The Padma Purana also explains, Sadeva Bahuda Bhutva Nirguna Purushottama Eki Bhuya Puna Shete Nirdosho Harir Adikrit. The same personality of Godhead, Purushottama, the original person, who is always devoid of material qualities and contamination, can exhibit himself in various forms and at the same time lie down in one form. In the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, it is said, Yajanti tun mayas tvam vai bahu mortyeka mortikam. O my Lord, although you manifest yourself in various forms, you are one without a second. Therefore, pure devotees concentrate upon you and worship you only. Bhagavatam 10:47. In the Kurma Purana, it is said, Astulas chanuschaiva stulo nuschaiva sarvataha avarna sarvata prokta shamo raktanta lochanaha. The Lord is personal, although impersonal. He is atomic, although great. And he is blackish and has red eyes, although he is colorless. By material calculation, all this may appear contradictory, but if we understand that the Supreme Personality of Godhead has inconceivable potencies, we can accept these facts as eternally possible in him. In our present condition, we cannot understand the spiritual activities and how they occur, but although they are inconceivable in the material context, we should not disregard such contradictory conceptions. Although it is apparently inconceivable, it is quite possible for the Absolute to reconcile all opposing elements. Srimad Bhagavatam establishes this in the 6th canto, 6, 9, 34, 37. Is everyone still
Yeah, there's fire.
Okay, cool. Yeah, anyway, I think it's very ecstatic because Srila Ramanujacarya, he just smashes Mayavada philosophy from all angles, so it's very complex. And if you look at his writing, it's extremely complex. And so I feel like this purport, it must be very pleasing to him. So it's nice to read. O my Lord, your transcendental pastimes and enjoyments all appear inconceivable because they are not limited by the causal and effective actions of material thought. You can do everything without performing bodily work. The Vedas say that the absolute truth has multifarious potencies and does not need to do anything personally. My dear Lord, you are entirely devoid of material qualities. Without anyone's help, you can create, maintain, and dissolve the entire qualitative material manifestation. Yet, in all such activities, you do not change. You do not accept the results of your activities, unlike ordinary demons and demigods, who suffer or enjoy the reactions of their activities in the material world. Unaffected by the reactions of work, you eternally exist in your full spiritual potency. This we cannot fully understand. Because you are unlimited in your six opulences, no one can count your transcendental qualities. Philosophers and other thoughtful persons are overwhelmed by the contradictory manifestations of the physical world and the propositions of the logical arguments and judgments. Because they are bewildered by word jugglery and disturbed by the different calculations of the scriptures, their theories cannot touch you, who are the ruler and controller of everyone, and whose glories are beyond conception. Your inconceivable potency keeps you unattached to the mundane qualities. Surpassing all conceptions of material contemplation, your pure transcendental knowledge keeps you beyond all speculative processes. By your inconceivable potency, there is nothing contradictory in you. People may sometimes think of you as impersonal or personal, but you are one. For persons who are confused and bewildered, a rope may manifest itself as different kinds of snakes. For similar confused persons who are uncertain about you, you create various philosophical methods in pursuance of their uncertain positions. The Supreme Lord, we should always remember the differences between spiritual and material actions. The Supreme Lord, being all spiritual, can perform any act without extraneous help. In the material world, if we want to manufacture an earthen pot, we need the ingredients, a machine, and also a laborer. But we should not extend this idea to the actions of the Supreme Lord, for he can create anything in a moment without that which appears necessary in our own conception. When the Lord appears as an incarnation to fulfill a particular purpose, this does not indicate that he is unable to fulfill it without appearing. He can do anything simply by his will, but by his causeless mercy, he appears to be dependent upon his devotees. He appears as the son of Yashoda Mata, not because he is dependent on her care, but because he accepts such a role by his causeless mercy. When he appears for the protection of his devotees, he naturally accepts trials and tribulations on their behalf. In the Bhagavad Gita, it is said that the Lord, being equally disposed towards every living being, has no enemies and no friends. But he has special affection for a devotee who always thinks of him in love. And one other point is, as I'm reading through this, seeing a lot of points that come up. When I was skimming through, looking for some quotes I could find in the Sri Bhasya of Ramanujacarya, there's different sections going over like different arguments against Shankaracharya's misleading theories. And a lot of those arguments, Srila Prabhupada's explaining them throughout the purport. I'm seeing the same ones appear, like the snake and the rope misconception, or Krishna being dependent on something else that was just mentioned, how he's fully independent. In the Bhagavad Gita, it is said that the Lord, being equally disposed toward every living being, has no enemies and no friends, but he has special affection for a devotee who always thinks of him in love. Therefore, neutrality and partiality are both among the transcendental qualities of the Lord, and they are properly adjusted by his inconceivable energy. The Lord is Parabrahman, or the source of the impersonal Brahma, which is his all-pervading feature of neutrality. In his personal feature, however, as the owner of all transcendental opulences, the Lord displays his partiality by taking the side of his devotees. Partiality and neutrality and all such qualities are present in God, otherwise they could not be experienced in the creation. Since he is the total existence, all things are properly adjusted in the absolute. In the relative world, such qualities are displayed in a perverted manner, and therefore we experience non-duality as a perverted reflection. Because there is no logic to explain how things happen in the realm of spirit, the Lord is sometimes described as being beyond the range of experience. But if we simply accept the Lord's inconceivability, we can then adjust all things in him. Non-devotees cannot understand the Lord's inconceivable energy, and consequently for them, it is said that he is beyond the range of conceivable expression. The author of the Brahma Sutras accepts this fact and says, Shrutes tu shabda mulatvat. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is not conceivable by an ordinary man. He can be understood only through the evidence of Vedic injunctions. The Skanda Purana confirms, Achintya kalu ye bhava natvams tarkena yojiyat. Matters inconceivable to a common man should not be a subject for argument. We find very wonderful qualities even in material jewels and drugs. Indeed, their qualities often appear inconceivable. Therefore, if we do not attribute inconceivable potencies to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, we cannot establish his supremacy. It is because of these inconceivable potencies that the glories of the Lord have always been accepted as difficult to understand. I'm checking if I read through the whole thing, if we get to the exact quotes from Ramanujacarya in time. I guess just so I don't like make a new class format, I could just jump to that, read those,
Where is it?
and then speak a
Is
little.
it closer to the end?
Yeah, and then 2 pages later.
We can just skip to it?
Yeah, I could. Because if I read through the whole purport, that would probably bring us to 8:30. Chandanacharya Prabhu, what do you think? Is it okay if I read through the whole thing, or should I skip ahead?
Cutoff is at 8:40,
At 8:40?
and then questions.
Hmm.
So whatever.
Oh yeah, I'm done reading.
8:30 is like the minimum,
Uh-huh.
so you can cut at 8:30 and ask the questions, or you can go to 8:40. Up to you.
If you want to talk to me first.
Okay.
Is it something that Srila Ramanujacarya has also included?
Yeah. That's where it is. So I could skip forward to there. All right. So maybe if devotees want, they can read the rest of this purport. I don't want to like make a new class format where I just read the entire class for the sake of keeping things how it usually goes. So yeah. So we're skipping ahead in the purport here. Sripad Ramanujacharya has also refuted the arguments of Shankara in his own commentary on the Vedanta Sutra, which is known as Sri Bhasya. Sripad Shankaracharya has tried to equate the Pancharatras. Okay, so now, quote. This is the quote beginning here from the Sri Bhasya. Sripad Shankaracharya has tried to equate the Pancharatras with the philosophy of the atheist Kapila, and thus he has tried to prove that the Pancharatras contradict the Vedic injunctions. The Pancharatras state that the personality of Jiva, called Sankarshan, has emerged from Vasudev, the supreme cause of all causes, that Pradyumna, the mind, has come from Sankarshan, and that Aniruddha, the ego, has come from Pradyumna. But one cannot say that the living entity Jiva takes birth or is created, for such a statement is against the injunction of the Vedas. As stated in the Katha Upanishad 2:18, living entities as individual spirit souls can have neither birth nor death. All Vedic literature declares that the living entities are eternal. Therefore, when it is said that Sankarshan is Jiva, this indicates that he is the predominating deity of the living entities. Similarly, Pradyumna is the predominating deity of the mind, and Aniruddha the predominating deity of the ego. It has been said, this is continuing the quote from Srila Ramanujacharya, it has been said that Pradyumna, the mind, was produced from Sankarshan. But if Sankarshan were a living entity, this could not be accepted, because a living entity cannot be the cause of the mind. The Vedic injunctions state that everything, including life, mind, and the senses, comes from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It is impossible for the mind to be produced by a living entity. For the Vedas state that everything comes from the absolute truth, the Supreme Lord. Sankarshan, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha have all the potent features of the absolute personality of Godhead, according to the revealed scriptures, which contain undeniable facts that no one can refute. Therefore, these quadruple forms are never to be considered ordinary living beings. Each of them is a plenary expansion of the absolute Godhead, and thus each is identical with the Supreme Lord in knowledge, opulence, energy, influence, prowess, and potencies. The evidence of Pancharatra cannot be neglected. Only untrained persons who have not genuinely studied the Pancharatras think that the Pancharatras contradict the Shrutis regarding the birth or beginning of the living entity. In this connection, we must accept the verdict of Srimad Bhagavatam, which says, "The absolute personality of Godhead, who is known as Vasudeva, and who is very much affectionate toward his surrendered devotees, expands himself in quadruple forms, who are subordinate to him, and at the same time identical with him in all respects." The Pushkara Samhita states, "The scriptures that recommend that Brahmanas worship the quadruple forms of the Supreme Personality of Godhead are called agamas, authorized Vedic literatures. In all Vaishnava literature, it is said that worshiping these quadruple forms is as good as worshiping the Supreme Personality of Godhead Vasudeva, who, in his different expansions, complete in 6 opulences, can accept offerings from his devotees of the results of their prescribed duties. Worshipping the expansions for pastimes such as Nrsimha, Rama, Shesha, and Kurma promotes one to the worship of the Sankarshan quadruple. From that position, one is raised to the platform of worshipping Vasudeva, the Supreme Brahman. In the Pushkara Samhita, it is said, if one fully worships according to the regulative principles, one can attain the Supreme Personality of Godhead Vasudeva. It is to be accepted that Sankarshan, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha are as good as Lord Vasudeva, for they all have inconceivable power and can accept transcendental forms like Vasudeva, Sankarshan, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha.
You did it. It's a period. After Vasudeva is a period.
Oh, okay. They can accept transcendental forms like Vasudeva. Sankarshan, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha are never born, but they can manifest themselves in various incarnations before the eyes of pure devotees. This is the conclusion of all Vedic literature, that the Lord can manifest himself before his devotees by his inconceivable power is not against the teachings of the Pancharatra. Since Sankarshan, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha are actually the predominating deities of all living entities, the total mind, and the total ego, the descriptions of Sankarshan, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha as jiva, mind, and ego are never contradictory to the statements of the scriptures. These names identify these deities just as the terms sky and light sometimes identify the absolute Brahman. The scriptures completely deny the birth or production of the living entity. The Parama Samhita In the Parama Samhita, it is described that material nature, which is used for others' purposes, is factually inert and always subject to transformation. The field of material nature is the arena of the activity of fruitive actors, and since the material field is externally related to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, it is also eternal. In every Samhita, the jiva, living entity, has been accepted as eternal, and in the Pancharatra, the birth of the jiva is completely denied. Anything that is produced must also be annihilated. Therefore, if we accept the birth of the living entity, we also have to accept his annihilation. But since the Vedic literatures say that the living entity is eternal, one should not think the living being to be produced at a certain time. In the beginning of the Parama Samhita, it is definitely stated that the face of material nature is constantly changeable. Therefore, beginning, annihilation, and all such terms are applicable only in material nature. And there's one more quote here. Considering all these points, one should understand that Shankaracharya's statement that Shankarshan is born as a jiva is completely against the Vedic statements. His assertions are completely refuted by the above arguments. In this connection, the commentary of Sridhar Swami on Srimad Bhagavatam 3134 is very helpful. So that ends the quote from Sripad Ramanujacarya. And then Srila Prabhupada just mentions here in one sentence, for a detailed refutation of Shankaracharya's arguments to prove Sankarshan, an ordinary living being, one may refer to Srimat Sudarshanacharya's commentary on Shrivasya, which is known as Shruta Prakashika. So there you go. That wasn't the full purport, but some of it there. You can get an understanding of how intricate the situation is and what the acharyas are going through to refute these detrimental misconceptions that are given by such personalities as Shankaracharya, which completely throw one off the path of a progressive spiritual life, going back home, back to Godhead, completely mislead the living entities. And we could also see when we're reading the part of Shankaracharya's arguments against the real conclusions of the Vedas, it's very confusing. And Lord Chaitanya, that's mentioned a lot often in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. When Lord Chaitanya was being instructed in Vedanta by, was it Prakashananda? No, who is? There's the painting of it. Yeah, Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya is instructing Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in Vedanta because it's the duty of the sannyasi to understand these things. So to help him out, he's instructing him, and he asks him that what's going on. I've been instructing you it was a long period of time, I think several days, and you've been completely quiet. You haven't said anything. And he tells him that it's one thing, you haven't said anything, so what's going on? And Lord Chaitanya explains to him that the verses of the Vedas, they're very clear and straightforward, but this interpretation that you're giving on it is very confusing, and it's covering the real meaning of the Vedas just like a cloud covers the light of the sun. So we see that the word jugglery that the Mayavadis have to do in order to get their false point across is very confusing. But if one takes the natural,
Yeah, it's very confusing.
but if one takes the natural conclusion of the Vedas, it's actually very straightforward and simple to understand that the living entities are the superior energy that's coming from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Also coming from him is his external energy, matter in this material world. And as long as the living entities are trying to exploit this material energy, they're always getting crushed by it. Material nature is having its effects and reactions, and no matter how much they try to enjoy it, they get the opposite result. So they're suffering in the material world by trying to enjoy the material world. But when the living entities understand their natural position as subservient to the Supreme Personality of Godhead and engage in his service, then they naturally they become reinstated in their constitutional position, where they can again take up their real life, being fully engaged in the Lord's service in the spiritual world or wherever the Lord may depute them to do their service to him. So it's a straightforward philosophy of what's actually going on in life. But the Mayavad philosophy covers it over. And we see that the acharyas, they take such strenuous, they take upon great austerities to preach the real message of the Supreme Personality of Godhead for the benefit of all living entities. For multiple reasons. One is because it's very pleasing to Krishna. One is also because it pleases their spiritual master. And another thing is because of the compassion they have for the suffering living entities. Like there's that verse in the Bhagavatam glorifying Lord Shiva when he's drinking the ocean of poison. Maybe. The verse is explaining how great personalities, they take on such heavy austerities just for the sake of, the suffering living entities, to help them. So we see our acharyas are like that. Like one devotee I've heard used to I haven't heard him say it much, but maybe in one class, I heard one devotee used to often say, you don't know, how much devotees had to go through just for you to have this plate of prasadam. So this is a fact, actually. The previous acharyas, all the great clear devotees passing down this understanding of Krishna consciousness for the benefit of all living entities, they take on severe austerities and go through so much to save the living entities from so many pitfalls on the path of devotional service and the path of going back to Godhead. And then we see how dangerous Mayavad philosophy is, that it has to be refuted in so many different ways. If one hears Mayavad philosophy, they become contaminated. And we see that sometimes someone might be practicing devotional service for some time, and they hear some ugly Mayavadi guru, and not too long after, they completely fall away from Krishna consciousness and become completely offensive to devotees. I don't know what happened first. They heard the Mayavad philosophy or they committed offenses and then they heard the philosophy. But somehow or other, these things go hand in hand because Mayavadi, Krishna aparadi. Mayavad philosophy, it's offensive to Krishna because they're, like it was stated in the purport, they're trying to kill Krishna or say that he's poverty stricken or, chop off the limbs of the Supreme Lord. You said he has no limbs, no form, no qualities. So it's the normal position, actually. It's the normal position of the conditioned living entity. Like Srila Prabhupada was saying in the beginning of the purport, the conditioned living entity is envious of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So this Mayavad philosophy, it's just more of that. It's not something spiritual or something advanced, but it's just a deeper, it's a sign of something deeper. It's a deeper expression of the conditioned living entity's envy of the Supreme Lord. Yeah, so we see some people are so foolish. They hear some Mayavad thing, and then they see that as a big opportunity to fully go for all their material desires in the material world. Some Mayavadi tells them that there's absolutely no difference between Shiva and the Jiva. Then some completely tamagun, so-called devotee who's making an attempt to practice Krishna consciousness with so much help from others, throws all that help out the window and goes, "Oh yeah, that sounds really good. Maybe I am Shiva. So maybe I can, just like Shiva enjoys unrestricted sex life with his consort. Maybe I can enjoy unrestricted sex life with my Tamagun wife, and we can be Tamagun together. And then when things don't work out, we can post all sorts of offensive stuff about our own spiritual master, about devotees, about Krishna consciousness in general online, all because some ugly Mayavadi guru told us that we're Shiva. And we can take his advice because that advice allows us to further enjoy sense gratification. That's one of the things that's explained in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, how when Shankaracharya is giving this misguiding philosophy, there's some mention in there about how it helps the conditioned living entities further indulge in sense gratification because they think I'm God, I'm the enjoyer, so I can enjoy my senses unrestrictedly. But we see what actually comes from Mayavad philosophy, what comes from unrestricted sense gratification is one goes completely insane. It's just the highest expression of the insane condition of the living entity. So people become happy by controlling their senses. That's why it's called the regulative principles of freedom. But if one is not controlling their senses, that means they're completely subjected to the dictates of the mind and the senses. You see, just like Hiranyakashipu, he was nuts. He was so angry because he's got full sensual power, but no sense control. So he's completely nuts. He's trying to kill his own son. He's always angry. His eyes are rolling in intoxication. He's blitzed. He's fried. So you see, when people they don't control their senses and they take some so-called spiritual process and use that as an excuse for more sense gratification, they go completely insane. And what's all their so-called spirituality and Mayavad philosophy lead to? In all their preaching, they preach online that I'm non-dual Shakta, Jiva, Tattva, whatever the heck that means. And then they post pictures of themselves naked on Instagram. So this is the pinnacle of your preaching, of your so-called spirituality, is you naked on Instagram. And it's not even like you look emaciated. So ugly naked picture on Instagram, and they say, "This makes me very spiritual." And then they post this guru all over who just looks like some ordinary karmi who was working some like IT job somewhere in New Delhi, who says there's absolutely no difference between the Jiva and Shiva. So we see the Mayavad philosophy is very degrading, and it makes one lose all sense of what is right and wrong. Already someone might be struggling in Krishna consciousness. They're very much in tamagun. They leave a mess everywhere. They can't even flush a toilet when they go to the bathroom. But then they hear Mayavad philosophy and they become even more tamagun, illicit sex, intoxication, all these things. Where is the hope for such a person? Even if they had a nice situation to begin with, they could even be the son of a devotee, So it seems like you got the great potential to just, you didn't make it in your last lifetime for whatever reason, you messed up. So, you got the situation to fully go for it in this lifetime and go back home, back to Godhead. But now, as Chanakya Pandit says, that if one isn't, if one's offspring doesn't become a devotee, then they're not putra, they're not a son, they're mutra, they're urine. So we can see such people, they might be born in a devotee family, have all facility to take the Krishna consciousness, everything's there, Prabhupada's books, so many devotees trying to help them. Then they hear Mayavad philosophy, and they're no longer even the son of a devotee, they're a devotee urine. So what's the use? They made their life completely useless by hearing Mayavad philosophy. So the Acharyas, they give such concise refutation of this philosophy, seeing how much of a pitfall it can be on the path of any, sincere practitioner, or even someone who's just making some attempt in devotional service, how it can, ruin their life. So the Acharyas, they completely smash this in very detailed and intricate ways. So, we can further study their refutations of this, dive more into it, so that we can be able to, help others not be misled on the path back home, back to Godhead. So that's just a few points. Is there any quick comment or question? I went over the time. Mahotsa Prabhu, Hare Krishna. Do you have some things to speak about Sripad Ramanujacarya, Prabhu, please?
There's no higher mantra than the lotus feet of the Guru.
Jai.
I mean, there's so much, but Prabhupada says that, I mean, anyway, it was awesome. You spent, I think, almost the entire class reading that purport, right?
Yeah, sorry.
That was from Chaitanya Charitamrita?
Was it?
That was from Chaitanya Charitamrita, right?
Chaitanya Charitamrita, Adi Leela, chapter 5, text 41.
Yeah, and Prabhupada actually says that we can take shelter of the lotus feet of Ramanujacarya in order to defeat Mayavadis. And we can see that actually our philosophy is the closest to Vishishtadvaita. So, yeah. Huh?
I was just repeating what you said. You said closest to Vishishtadvaita.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else to share about Sripad Ramanujacarya?
I mean, there's so much, right? Anyway, I'm actually giving a whole series about Lakshmana and Ramanujacharya, because when Ramanujacharya appeared in this world, his parents gave him the name Lakshmana Deshika. Why? Because one thing is Ramanuja. It literally means Rama Anuja, Rama's younger brother, which means Lakshmana.
He's Lakshmana.
So Ramanujacharya is actually Lakshman.
Whoa.
So Lakshmana is Vishnu, right?
Yeah, Lakshmana Deshika. Yeah. So Ramanujacharya is actually Lakshman, and I'm giving this whole series of talks as to how Lakshman came as Ramanujacharya to teach us Sharanagati.
Wow. Is there also some pastime where Sripad Ramanujacharya, he takes on the form of Shesha, Ananta Shesha?
I don't know about it. It's possible. But I've never heard about it. But one interesting anecdote, if you don't mind me
please.
saying, I don't know if the devotees can hear me.
Yeah, the speaker's loud.
Okay. So Ramanujacharya was going to a Veda school, right? A school where you learn Vedas as a Brahmana. And he had this teacher known as Yadava Prakash. And this Yadava Prakash, he was a very expert Sanskrit teacher, extremely qualified, very pious person. And he was starting to, so Ramanujacharya, of course, became his favorite student, because why would he not be? Because he had all the qualities of a bona fide disciple. And then once, while Ramanujacharya was massaging his Sanskrit guru's body, that time, so one of his disciples had asked Yadava Prakash the meaning of a particular verse. And the translation that Yadava Prakash gave is that the eyes of the Supreme Lord are compared. And I mean, you can just see how insidious Mayavadis are. I mean, I feel bad even saying it, but I'm going to say it anyway, because that's the pastime. Yadava Prakash said that the eyes of the Supreme Lord are compared to the buttocks of a monkey.
Oh,
wow.
Yeah, so I mean, and that's how he translated the Sanskrit, actually. But then, and then all of a sudden he felt like hot tears falling on his body. And then when you cry and the tears are hot, that means you're crying out of sorrow. When you cry and the tears are cool, that means you're crying out of joy. So when he felt these tears falling upon him, he looked up and he saw Ramanujacarya. Why are you crying? He said, "My dear master, I cannot accept your explanation that the eyes of the Supreme Lord are like the buttocks of a monkey. I can never accept that." He said, "Oh, you're such a big scholar. Why don't you explain it?" So then Ramanujacharya, with his pure brilliance, completely smashes him and shows how actually the Sanskrit actually means the Supreme Lord has eyes like a lotus flower. And then like this, more Yadav Prakash would be putting up arguments. Yeah, Ramanujacharya at a very young age would immediately like smash them. And he would smash them not like, "I told you you're wrong, you fool," like not like that, but like, just his character was so pure. He polite but firm. And he did that a few times. And then one of the things which happened was there was a great king, and the king's daughter had been possessed by a ghost. And they were trying to call different exorcists. Is that how you say it? Exorcists, yeah. They were trying to call a different exorcists. Nothing was working. And then Yadava Prakash was famous all over the world to be like the best exorcist of all times, basically. So he was invited by the king, and then the king he was trying to chant all the mantras and tantras that he knew in order to get rid of the Brahma Rakshasa, which had haunted the princess. But then the princess, the Brahma Rakshasa was talking to the princess, and she's saying, whatever mantra he was chanting, he was just completely just counteracting it. No problem. Because the Brahma Rakshasa are basically Brahmanas who died an inauspicious death because of something inauspicious that they did. They became Rakshasas and they take possession. That's why we burn our Brahmin threads, because we don't want Brahma Rakshasas to take possession of that and become more powerful. Right? So the Brahma Rakshasa he was whatever mantra he was saying, the Brahma Rakshasa was neutralizing it. And then he started laughing loudly through the body of the princess, and like you can imagine, like shrieking, right? Like the Rakshasi shriek, and you hear sometimes you hear women on the streets shrieking like that, but they're shrieking. And she started laughing, and he said, "Hey, Yadava Prakash, who are you? You don't, in my past life, I used to be a yajnik Brahmana, and therefore I'm able to completely counteract all the things you're telling me. But you don't even know who you were. I know who I was in my past life. You don't even know who you were in your past life." And then Yadava Prakash says, "Oh, and then the Brahma Rakshasa says, 'I know who you were.'" He said, "Who was I?" And then the Brahma Rakshasa tells Yadava Prakash that in your previous life you were actually a lizard, and you were just sitting by near a creek or something with your lizard family, and then some Vaishnavas happened to go by. And then once the Vaishnavas sat there, they happened to go by, they sat there, they ate. And then after they were done eating, they were washing their mouths. And you somehow or the other happened to have the good fortune of eating the remnants of those Vaishnavas. And now you became Yadava Prakash. You see, just by eating the remnants of the Vaishnavas, a Jiva's qualification went from being in a body of a lizard to being like one of the world's greatest Sanskrit scholars.
Whoa.
Right? And I mean, as we see as the pastime goes on, the seed of bhakti was also planted in his heart because he, as a lizard, ate the remnants of a Vaishnava. Right? So the Brahma Rakshasa tells him, "Now, if you really want me to leave, call your disciple Ramanuja." So then Ramanujacharya comes, and then he says, "I will only leave if you keep both your lotus feet on the head of this princess." So then Ramanujacharya said, "I will do it, but on one condition. You have to give some sign that you left." So then the Brahma Rakshasa says, "Oh, no problem. You see, look outside that window. There's a tree, and as I'm leaving, I will break that branch and I'll go away." So Ramanujacharya keeps both his lotus feet upon this princess's head, And then the Raksha, Brahma Raksha says, ecstatic, he's liberated, right? We read this. Naisha Matistavad Rukramangrim, Spashachanartha, Bagamoyartha, Mahiyasham Raja Padobhishekam, Nishkinchananam, Nagrinita Yavat. That unless you smear upon your body the dust of the Lord's feet of a great Vaishnava, there is no means of attaining Krishna Bhakti, So he does that and he breaks that branch and goes away. So then you can see Yadav Prakash becomes even more insecure now. So he plots to kill Ramanujacarya actually. Anyway, the association of the Vaishnavas that he had in his past life by eating the remnants and by the association of Ramanujacarya, at the end of, when he was nearing his end, he actually realized what a grievous, sinister person he had been. And he went and he surrendered unto the lotus feet of Ramanujacarya and became Ramanujacarya's disciple. And the Ramanujacarya ordered him to write a book refuting Mayavad. And he killed it. So anyway, that's one in its unlimited glories. But yeah, Ramanujacarya is Lakshman. That's I've been giving a series of lectures about this actually during our whatever the Wednesday Bhagavad Gita class and all this.
Sounds fired up.
If you'd like.
Yeah, we'll tune in.
Yeah.
Jai. Thank you, Prabhu.
Jai. Okay.
All right.
Thank you, Prabha.
Sripad. Sorry, real quick last insert. There's something in the Sri Bhasya, a little section that looked really interesting. I don't know if the boys want to ever check it out, but there's a little section where Sripad Ramanujacharya says that Shabda, just sound, just Shabda itself, that's it, refutes impersonalism. So he's got some section just showing how just sound refutes impersonalism.
Wow.
It looked really interesting.
So much nectar, huh?
Yeah.
That's what Prabhupada said. The Ramanujacharya smashed the Mayavadis so badly that he punches the Mayavadis so badly that although they call themselves Vedantis, they became Vedantis.
Vedantis.
Vedantis, but actually they're Vedantis because they have no teeth from being smashed by Ramanuja.
Jai. Sripad Ramanujacharya ki jai. Shri Chaitanya Charitamrita ki jai.
This is Rsi-Kumar Prabhu ki jai. Anabol.
Wow.